Hi everyone, this is Kevin here from Smartphone Review Pro, and in this video, we're going to be checking out LG K92 5G pros and cons. So we're going to be going over my best and worst things about this phone. Now I want to start off and mention that I actually think this is a very good product from LG and one of their best attempts yet at a lower mid-range phone. Now based off their previous track record, that's not saying a whole lot, but I think they did a really good job with this one. So we're going to start by first going over my 5 favorite things, and then at the end of the video, I'll go over my 5 least favorite things. Now keep in mind that the least favorite things are kind of nitpicking because in general, I do think this is a good phone. However, those things are things that I would like to see potentially implemented in future phones from LG, and the 5 cons that I'll be going over might be things that are important to you specifically, so you might want to be aware of them. But let's first go over my 5 favorite things or 5 pros about this phone. So coming in at number 1, and that is that we have a side-mounted fingerprint sensor. I'm so glad that LG went with this compared to having a fingerprint sensor on the back of the phone or even having one built into the display. And the reason for that is because I feel like having the fingerprint sensor on the power button really is the most convenient placement, because anytime that you're going to turn on the display in your phone anyway, you're already going to be putting your finger over the power button, so it's super convenient. So we'll give that a try right now. And there you go. We'll do it one more time. And again, really quick, really accurate, and also very convenient. So I applaud LG for putting the fingerprint sensor right here. Now that being said, I don't think it's necessarily bad if a phone has one on the back or has it built into the display, but for me personally, I just think this placement really is the best. Now I understand that having a fingerprint sensor in the display is kind of the most modern approach out of these 3 different methods, but I don't think it's necessarily the most practical approach. The most practical placement, in my opinion, is having it right where it is here on the K92 5G. But I'm really curious to know what you think. Do you think having the fingerprint sensor on the power button is the best placement for it? I really want to know. Now coming in at number 2, my second favorite thing about the LG K92 5G, and that is the general design of the phone. Now, LG's designs have not quite been the most exciting, especially over the last couple of years. I know that LG got a lot of praise for the design of the LG Velvet that was launched in the middle of 2020, but really, I think this design is even better. The problem that I had with the Velvet is that the LG Velvet still had the water drop notch, but with the LG K92 5G, we have a hole punch for the front-facing camera. And I believe as far as phones being launched in the US by LG, the only phone that had a hole punch for the front-facing camera prior to this one was the LG Q70, and that phone was only offered on a couple of carriers. So this general design reminds me a lot, especially of the Samsung Galaxy A51, but in a good way because I think it's very practical overall. Now as far as the design on the back side of the phone goes, I also think this looks good. Now I noticed that some people thought that the camera setup on the back looked a little bit unusual, but I don't really see the issue. Whether they had a camera square or not around the 4 cameras here, at the end of the day, does it really make a difference? I don't think it does. With the LG Velvet, they had these 4 circles in kind of a vertical format, and then here with the K92 5G, they have the 4 circles in a square format. So I neither think this is good or bad, really. As long as we have the cameras on the back of the phone, I don't really care how they're arranged. But another interesting thing is how big of a flash we're getting on the back side of the phone. That's a massive flash. And then another convenient thing too is that we have the 3.5mm headphone jack on the bottom of the phone. So in general, I just think this is a very practical design. I'm a big fan of it, and there's really nothing about this phone that makes it really inconvenient or gimmicky. Now my third favorite thing about this phone definitely has to be the cameras. We're really getting a variety of different options here when it comes to taking photos and videos. For example, with the front camera, it's a 16 megapixel camera, and you'll see more in my full review, but I was able to take some great looking pictures and videos with it. And then for the rear cameras, we have a 64 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide angle camera, a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. Here's how the rear camera looks through the camera app. Then from here, we can switch over to portrait mode to get nice blurred out backgrounds. We can also switch over to the ultra wide angle camera to fit a lot more content into the frame, which is very convenient. Definitely a big fan of that feature as well. Then we can go over to the More tab. And then from here, we have the macro camera. So with the macro camera, we can get nice and close up to get a lot of detail. Then after that, we can flip around to the front-facing camera, and there's me right there. And then we also get front-facing portrait mode as well. And again, I'll show you all these photos in better detail in the full review video, but you can see here I was able to take a nice looking portrait selfie. We'll go over to a couple of the other photos. Let's see. Took this one of this chair. Again, really good detail in general. Here's a good one that I took of this plant. Nice, awesome detail here. So in general, I'm very happy with the photo and video quality from this phone. Now with the rear camera, you can take video at up to 4K at 30 FPS. And with the front camera, we are limited at 1080p at 30 FPS. But in general, I do think the cameras are a strong point with the LG K92 5G. My third favorite thing about this phone is the processor. So this is one of the few devices, at least at the moment, in the US that has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 690 5G processor. That's a very new processor from Qualcomm. And so far, I've been very happy with the performance. Everything runs nice and smoothly. Of course, not to the level of a flagship, but this phone is significantly less expensive than a flagship, so keep that in mind as well. But I did run a benchmark test using the Geekbench 5 benchmark app, and you can see here that I got a single core score of 607 and a multi-core score of 1830. So in general, I've been happy with the performance from this phone. And again, just to clarify, sure, there is plenty of room for improvement, but you're gonna have to spend more money to get a better processor. But for what this phone is, and the segment that it's in, I feel like having the Snapdragon 690 5G processor is a very fair processor to have. And then in addition to that, having 6GB of RAM here with the phone works very well too. And for my final pro with this device, and don't get me wrong, there are plenty more, but these are my top 5, don't forget that. But I really like that we're getting 128GB of internal storage with the phone. So that's quite a bit of internal storage. And in addition to that, we also get microSD card expansion. So if you're somebody that likes to download a lot of music for offline use, or you like to download movies or other videos for offline use as well, then having that much internal storage is going to be great for you. And also, as time goes on and apps continue to get even bigger and bigger in file size than they already have, you'll be all good to go because this phone is already giving you a lot of internal storage. So I feel like 128 gigs is a very generous amount here from LG. And I'm very happy that we're getting that here with this phone. But now that we've gone over the top 5 pros of this phone, let's go over my top 5 cons, with the first one being the display. Now don't get me wrong, I think the display with this phone is pretty decent, but the biggest issue with it is that it is LCD, and I wish they would have given us an OLED display instead, especially since LG as a company has a lot of experience with OLED, and I think that would have taken this phone to the next level. So again, I am happy with how the display looks, but knowing that this phone could have had an OLED display really makes me wish that it had one, especially since the Samsung Galaxy A51, which I feel like is one of the biggest competitors to this phone, does have an AMOLED display, which is better than this, by the way, which is better than this LCD display. The second con with this phone is that there is no face unlock. You can see these are the various options. We have swipe, pattern, pin, password, and then fingerprints. So again, the fingerprint sensor is awesome on here, but I do wish they would have given us face unlock as well. Having both face unlock and the fingerprint sensor really gives you the most flexibility when using your phone. Now, the third con about this phone is that there's no water or dust resistance. So if you are someone that often gets their phone wet, maybe you have a history of dropping your devices in water pretty often, I'm guessing not on purpose, then you might want to consider getting a different device than the LG K92 5G. Because this phone does not have any sort of certification when it comes to water or dust resistance. So you're really on your own if you happen to drop this phone in water. The fourth con about this device is the software on here, especially LG's skin. Now I do appreciate that we are getting Android 10 with the phone, and I really hope that we get the Android 11 update sooner than later. But I think it's time for LG just to give up on their skin, or just to start from scratch. I do appreciate the various features that they've added to their skin, whether it's on this phone or other phones that they offer, but I prefer Motorola's approach instead. What Motorola does is that they start with stock Android and they try to keep things looking and feeling as stock as possible, but then they just add additional features to that. Whereas with LG, yes, they've added a lot of useful features, which I like, but they've also changed a lot of things with the OS in general from stock, and I feel like they're changing things just for the sake of changing things. For example, it doesn't need to look this way, just have it look stock. I just feel like all these modifications are just very unnecessary when they're already getting a really excellent interface to work with stock Android. And then the other issue too is that this phone does come with a lot of bloatware. Now, I've either uninstalled or hidden most of the bloatware, but I'm just not a fan of it. Now, I know that a lot of the bloatware is added by the carrier and not LG, but other companies like Apple are able to tell the carriers to not add bloatware, and the carriers comply. So I wish LG would do the same thing. And then finally, for the last con, and this isn't really a huge deal, but it is something that I wish was not this way, and that is the Google Assistant button. So the phone does have a dedicated Google Assistant button on the bottom left here, and when you tap on it, it does start up Google Assistant. But I personally just don't really use it, especially with this button. You can already easily access it through the bar right here, but I mostly use smart assistants when I'm at home anyway, and I already have smart speakers in almost every room. So having this button here, for me at least, is pretty unnecessary. And another thing that annoys me about it as well is that there's no way to reprogram it to activate other apps. If that was the case, then I'd be all for it, because I like when certain phones have customizable buttons that you can have do a variety of different actions. But unfortunately with this button, you are limited to just using it with Google Assistant. So not a deal breaker, but it is something that I wish worked a little bit differently. But I'm really curious to know what you think about these pros and cons with the LG K92 5G. Again, I want to clarify, as far as the cons go about this phone, most of them are not really big issues, and they are things that you'd probably expect anyway, because every mid-range or budget phone is bound to have at least some sort of compromise. That's how they're able to give you the really good deals, but I do want you to be aware of these things prior to potentially getting the phone. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Definitely let me know what you think about the device, and let me know if I happen to miss anything, whether it was a pro or a con, and I will see you in the next video.